Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with a little chat about why classical music always sounds better on repetition. In other words, the more you listen, the more you get out of it. I mean, I think that's an incontrovertible fact. And it's an amazing thing when you think about it. I mean, most people don't stop to consider, but it really is an amazing thing. And it's one of the reasons why, of course, it doesn't have wider uptake in the universe at large. It's not because people can't understand it. It's because they don't have time for it. It's like reading, War and Peace. You got to do it maybe once in your lifetime, maybe twice. If you're an English lit major, you may have to read it 100 times. English lit, Russian lit, whatever lit. A literature person, you may read it. I read The Lord of the Rings maybe 20 times when I was a kid because I got hooked on it. So you can get hooked on things. I mean, that happens. But by and large, something big that takes a lot of time is going to be a rare occurrence for most people. But that's not because the language is in any way difficult. And language is the point I want to make. Because one of the fascinating things about musics all over the world, is that the style of music is indeed a language. And Western music is a very rich and splendid language. And it's one that is absolutely universal. It's an irony that, classical music people, culture people keep saying, well, music's universal, but it's not universally enjoyed by the universe at all. In fact, it's a tiny little niche, but it is universal. And the reason it's universal is because like any other language, the main reason is because like any other language, it wasn't invented by a bunch of, egghead intellectuals who say, this is what it's going to be. Not at all. Languages don't exist because people invent them out of whole cloth, unless it's Esperanto. There are other artificial languages or computer languages, Fortran, I don't know. But that dates me, doesn't it? Anyway, languages exist because a huge number of people over a huge span of time decided they want to communicate comprehensively with each other. And so gradually the means to communicate evolves. But it's a corporate decision. It's not an individual decision. And the language of music, for all that people, make an intellectual issue of it or a study of it or, take courses in it, is a corporate decision of that kind. It simply happened. No one decided that it was going to take the form it did. It evolved that way in a natural process based on practice. What singers and composers and musicians and all the people, players involved in the business of music decided they wanted to do based on what listeners like yourselves wanted to hear. So it is a universal language, a completely universal language. And although some people may use it in a more sophisticated way or in a bigger way, the difference between War and Peace or let's take an English one since I'm doing English, Middlemarch. Ugh, hated Middlemarch, but okay, Middlemarch. The difference between Middlemarch and a billboard, eat at Denny's. Those are two identical means of communication, but one is infinitely larger and more complex than the other. But the means of communication is the same, and everyone is just as capable of understanding what's said. The only question is whether they want to spend the time. So yes, the language of classical music exists, and it is potentially, let's say this, potentially universal. But it does require getting to know it. And the fascinating thing about this particular language, there's one way to learn a language, remember, is immersion. mean, if you go to Berlitz, you learn immersion. You just speak the language, and you have to speak the language, and you don't have any choice, and you pick up the words as you go, and you listen to native speakers, and eventually it soaks in. If you're a child, if you're a baby, then it just happens, and you don't think about it at all. If you're an adult, oh gosh, it takes a lot more work, but the process is similar. Well, with music, that's what happens. If you immerse yourself, I mean, you could take a course in music theory. I don't know if that's going to help you, to be honest with you. But, I mean, it will help you learn music theory, but will it help you understand what a composer is all about? I don't know. But I will definitely say that the more you listen to this particular language, it teaches you as you listen. It explains itself. That's the wonderful thing about it, because it's nonverbal. Even the fact that most people listen to music with words, that is songs, it doesn't change anything about the underlying facts of how the music operates. The music operates by its own rules. And so it basically educates you while you listen. And whether you're conscious of naming certain conventions or talking about processes that you hear over and over again, or give them, conscious shape or form or definition or verbal tags or whatever, you understand it. You acquire it. And, I'm going to give you a little example of how that operates, because I really think it's kind of fascinating. Here is possibly the most conventional or simple musical phrase. It consists of two chords. They are called, in music theory terms, a dominant seventh and a tonic. They're really marvelous chords. Well, the tonic chord is the chord that defines the key you're in traditional harmony. And the dominant seventh is the chord that comes before the ending. Here is the end of Smetana's Ma Vlast, the last two chords. Now, if I were to play you just the first one and not the second one, if you are familiar with the language of Western music, you would go absolutely bonkers, because you know that next chord has to be there. I mean, it's incomplete. It has to end. And so those two chords say something. What they say is the end. The end. I mean, and they do it in a billion different pieces of music. It's a very, very common way of saying the end. And we accept that because we hear it over and over and over again, and we know it. Now, if you are completely unfamiliar with Western music and you don't know that formula, and then you hear da ba, you're going to say, okay, well, that's the end. And it may not be that powerful. It may not be that satisfying because you haven't heard a million other examples of it. It still does its thing. It's a satisfying ending. It works. But you don't maybe associate it with the concept, the end. It's possible that you don't. But once you do, fabulous things can happen. Here, for example, is the opening, the very opening, of Beethoven's First Symphony. Now, wait a minute, you say. It's an opening. It's not an ending. What is he doing? Well, if you know the language of Western music, because you've heard it 100 billion times, not because I'm telling you this, because you've heard it, then you know that it opens with an ending. That's really weird. I mean, it's opening with an ending. There's something a little strange there. And then if you listen to the next chord, in the opening of Beethoven's First Symphony, next two chords, you get this. Which is even more puzzling because it's ending again. But now the ending seems to be somehow in question. It's not as firm an ending as it was, but he's saying the end. But we're feeling something that's a little different from what he's saying. And then you get the third attempt where he really is trying to jam down your throat the fact that this is an ending. It's going the end. Here. So, what does that mean? Well, if someone's saying one thing and doing another, it's a joke. I mean, he's playing with us. He's toying with our expectations. He knows that we are going to think that that is the end, but it's not. I mean, we know it's not for a lot of reasons. First of all, because we've just sat down at a concert and they just started, and they didn't start with the end. It's like having the Twinkie. It's like having the Twinkie before the meal. Nothing says the meal is over like a Twinkie. I mean, seriously, what could you possibly want to eat after one of these things? But, you know, that's what happens. So you don't start your meal with a Twinkie, and God knows you don't start with 3 of them. Heaven forfend. But what is happening? Well, let's listen a little further. Let's take in the whole passage. You can look at my Twinkie while we take in the whole passage. Here we go. So all is forgiven. Eventually we come around to where we're supposed to be. It's the home key, but you don't need to know that. You just feel that, okay, it's settled down. That bizarre opening was some kind of eccentricity. Eventually you may come to think it's funny, which it actually is. And the symphony can continue on. And that's how we absorb the language of music. We just suck it up. we absorb it, and we understand what's going on. And the more we listen, the more we understand. That's the point. And so, this is an incredibly simple example. Obviously, the language of Western music has, infinite nuances, just as English or Russian or French or Spanish or any language has an enormous range of nuance and size and richness of vocabulary. And the more you know it, the more you learn it, the more familiar you are, you're in business. But, that's why works in large forms, particularly, which are very rich in language, in the essence of the language, the facts, the grammar, the structures of the language, are going to be better the more you listen to them, because they say more. It's really very simple. I know it's a truism, isn't it? But it's funny. It's funny. People sort of think of music as this sort of nebulous thing. It's a vaporous, somewhat intangible thing. And it is, of course, because it consists of sound moving through time, and it only exists while it's happening. But a novel, Middlemarch, only exists while you're reading it, enduring it. I mean, it's just the way it is. If you're not taking the time to do it, you're obviously not understanding what it's saying. But the potential is always there. And I have to say, it's much easier with music than it is with, like, Middlemarch, in my view. But that's a personal thing, of course. If you think about music that way, if you think about the nature of music and what it expresses and what it's trying to tell you in terms of language, then I think, and I'm talking now more to people who are sort of getting started with classical music particularly, you'll realize that you can listen to anything, anytime, as much as you want or don't want, and you will always be acquiring more experience, more knowledge, and thus more understanding of the specific syntax, the specific messages that the language communicates. And of course, composers of genius always use that language in a fresh and original way, just as great authors use their language in a fresh and original way. And this is true, by the way, not just of normal tonal harmony. It's true of any style of music which is self-consistent and used with purpose, with knowledge of what its various components represent and how best to manipulate them to communicative effect. So there's plenty of, modern music that doesn't follow the rules of classical tonality or atonal music and all kinds of other stuff that could be fabulous. It's all in the nature of the language, how it's used, and of course, the brilliance of the composer who uses it. There are many composers who have no clue what they're doing, or had less of a clue what they were doing, and so their handling of the language is not very good. We don't evaluate music the way we evaluate literature or writing. If you want to see, examples of bad writing when you go to music class, right? Not music class, when you go to English class, you're studying sentences and sentence structure. They give you all these examples of bad sentences with dangling participles and run-on things and, everything you can do to destroy the beauty of what exists of English grammar. And so, you're more conscious of the fact that there's good writing and bad writing. And it's harder to judge whether there's good music and bad music because we don't understand it as a language the way we think of language. But it's possible. It's possible. I mean, if you listen to something like Mozart's musical joke, where you've got a wonderful piece where a composer is demonstrating how they don't really understand their language, the jokes only get funnier the better you know the language. The first time you hear it, you might think it's perfectly normal. There's nothing wrong with it at all. But the more you learn about classical music and the more you listen to music of that era, the more bizarre the piece becomes because you've learned the language. And so that's it. Now, I just wanted to give you some examples and talk about, this concept because I really do believe that classical music is better the more you listen to it. And it only improves with time. Now, there is such a thing as getting oversaturated. You can overindulge in anything. Believe me, how many of these can you tolerate? Let's face it. When you were a kid, they were a treat. When you were an adult, they may have become vile and repulsive. When you get older, maybe you're nostalgic and you want to try one again. It depends on your mood. But that's you. That's not the fault of the language. If you decide to recklessly overindulge, then, you get what you pay for. You've got the consequences of overindulgence. You have to decide what works. But that doesn't say anything about the music itself. It says something about your ability to interact with it. But a great performance of a great work that you thought you knew backwards, forwards, and sideways might strike you as a revelation, as something you've never heard before. The possibility is always there. Always. And that's what I'd like you to keep in mind. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks so much for joining me. Take care.